November 14th, 2016, 11:47 p.m., San Francisco. Joe Sullivan stares at his laptop screen. Uber's chief security officer, former federal prosecutor, 20 years fighting cybercrime, now watching his company's worst nightmare unfold in real time. 57 million people, names, email addresses, phone numbers, driver's licenses, gone. But that's not the worst part. The worst part? 2 hackers sitting in their homes, thousands of miles away, holding all that data, demanding payment. Not millions, just $100,000. Sullivan has a choice. Report to authorities within 72 hours. Federal law. Protect 57 million people who trust Uber with their personal information. Or pay the hackers. Hide the breach. Pretend nothing happened. He chose wrong. This is the story of how America's most valuable startup paid $100,000 to bury a crime. How they lied to regulators already investigating them. How 57 million people rode in Ubers, ordered food, lived their lives, never knowing their data was stolen. And this is what that cover-up cost. $148 million in fines. Criminal conviction. Prison time for an executive. And a lesson about data privacy that affects everyone who owns a smartphone. But this isn't just about Uber. If you have a smartphone with any apps installed, ever used a ride-sharing service, credit cards stored online, personal information with any company, your data lives on servers someone can hack. 57 million victims thought Uber would protect them. Instead, executives chose cover-up over honesty. And here's the scary part. Uber wasn't unique. This pattern of breach, hide, get caught repeats constantly. Let me show you how it happened and the warning signs companies always ignore. But first, understand the pattern. This isn't Uber's story alone. It's the story of every major data breach cover-up in the past 20 years. There's a pattern that repeats whenever companies prioritize reputation over responsibility. Stage 1, the breach. Hackers break in, steal data, company discovers it. Stage 2, the calculation. Executives weigh options, report or hide. Stage 3, the cover-up. Pay hackers, delete evidence, lie to regulators. Stage 4, the discovery. Someone talks, journalists investigate, truth emerges. Stage 5, the reckoning. Massive fines, criminal charges, destroyed careers. Equifax followed this pattern in 2017. 147 million Americans' data stolen. Executives sold stock before announcing. CEO resigned. Company paid $700 million. Yahoo followed this in 2013. 3 billion accounts compromised. Hid it for 3 years. Destroyed acquisition deal with Verizon. CEO lost bonus. Target followed this in 2013. 40 million credit cards stolen during Christmas shopping. Ignored warnings. CEO fired. $290 million settlement. Same pattern, different companies. Same result. Cover-up costs more than honesty. In November 2016, Uber entered stage 2. Let me show you what happened next. To understand why Uber's cover-up was so damaging, you need to understand what the company was already hiding from. The year is 2016. Uber is the world's most valuable startup, valued at $68 billion, operating in 600 cities worldwide, revolutionizing transportation. But behind the success? Chaos. If you remember the early days of Uber, maybe you or your children started using the app around 2012, 2013, the company moved fast, broke rules, asked forgiveness instead of permission. That was their culture. That was their CEO, Travis Kalanick's philosophy. By 2016, that philosophy had created serious problems. The Federal Trade Commission was already investigating Uber, not for one issue, for multiple privacy violations. The investigation started in 2015 after reports that Uber employees were tracking riders without permission, watching where people went, who they visited, when they traveled. Think about that. Every time you requested a ride, Uber employees could watch you, track you, know your patterns. The FTC wanted answers. Uber promised cooperation, promised transparency, promised they'd protect customer data. That promise lasted exactly 6 months. Here's what you need to know about data breaches and federal law. It's simple. When a company discovers hackers stole customer information, federal regulations require notification. Tell affected customers within a reasonable time, usually 72 hours. Tell the FTC, tell state attorneys general, tell everyone who needs to protect themselves. Why? Because stolen data gets used for identity theft, credit card fraud, bank account drains. People need warning to freeze accounts, change passwords, monitor credit reports. It's not complicated. It's basic responsibility. Uber knew this law. They had lawyers, compliance officers, a chief security officer who spent his career prosecuting cyber criminals. But they also had something else. Desperation. Travis Kalanick was building toward an initial public offering, taking Uber public, making early investors billionaires, making himself one of the world's richest men. A massive data breach that kills IPOs, destroys valuations, triggers lawsuits, invites regulatory scrutiny. Remember, the FTC was already investigating Uber for privacy violations, already questioning whether Uber could be trusted with customer data. Now imagine telling that same FTC, by the way, while you were investigating us for privacy problems, hackers stole 57 million people's information. That's career-ending, company-destroying. So when Joe Sullivan received that message on November 14th, 2016, he faced an impossible choice. Actually, not impossible. The law was clear. The right choice was obvious. But the pressure? That was enormous. Sullivan wasn't alone in the decision. He reported to Kalanick, consulted with Craig Clark, Uber's senior lawyer. They discussed options, weighed consequences, and together they chose wrong. Here's what made this breach particularly bad. The hackers didn't just steal names and emails. They accessed Uber's GitHub account. Think of it as a filing cabinet where programmers store their work. Inside that account, access codes to Uber's main database, Amazon Web Services credentials, keys to the entire kingdom. With those credentials, hackers downloaded 57 million user records, riders and drivers, 600,000 driver's license numbers, names, email addresses, phone numbers. In some cases, location data, ride history for drivers, many of them older Americans supplementing retirement income or Social Security. This was especially damaging. Driver's licenses contain everything needed for identity theft, full legal names, birth dates, addresses, license numbers, photos. If you know anyone who drove for Uber in 2016, their license was likely in that breach. The hackers were sophisticated but not unusual. A 20-year-old from Florida named Brandon Charles Glover, a Turkish hacker named Vasile Miraker. They found Uber's vulnerability the way most hackers do, searching GitHub for mistakes. Programmers sometimes accidentally upload passwords, access codes, credentials. It's a common error. Good companies have systems to catch it. Uber's systems failed. Glover and Miraker found the credentials, used them to access Uber's Amazon cloud storage, downloaded everything they could, then sent a message, not demanding millions, just $100,000. A ransom. Pay us, and we'll delete everything. Refuse, and we'll sell it. They probably expected Uber to refuse, to call the FBI, to prosecute them. They didn't expect Uber to pay. This is where understanding corporate culture matters. Uber in 2016 operated under a principle employees called always be hustlin'. Move fast, win at all costs, don't let rules slow you down. If you see a problem, fix it quietly. Don't create bad press. That culture came from the top, from Kalanick, from executives who believed Uber was too important, too innovative, too valuable to follow ordinary rules. Data breach notification laws? Those were for ordinary companies, not for Uber. At least, that's what they believed. November 14th, 2016. The moment Joe Sullivan saw the breach notification, the clock started ticking. Federal law was clear. 72 hours to notify authorities. Maybe a few extra days for investigation, but not weeks, not months. Definitely not forever. Sullivan's first call wasn't to the FBI. It was to Craig Clark, Uber's senior lawyer. Clark's advice? Let's think about this. Think about this. 4 words that changed everything. But because thinking about it turned into strategy sessions. Strategy sessions turned into calculations. Calculations turned into a plan. The plan was simple. Make the problem disappear. Here's how they did it. First, contact the hackers. Not through official channels, not through law enforcement, through Uber's bug bounty program. Let me explain bug bounty programs. They're legitimate. Lots of tech companies use them. The idea, pay security researchers who find vulnerabilities, report the bug, get a reward, usually $500, maybe $5,000 for serious issues, occasionally $20,000 for critical problems. $100,000? That's not a bug bounty, that's ransom. But if you call it a bug bounty, it looks legal, looks normal, looks like responsible security practice instead of criminal cover-up. Sullivan and Clark reached out to the hackers through this program, made an offer, $100,000. In exchange, delete all stolen data, sign non-disclosure agreements, promise never to reveal the breach. The hackers agreed. Think about what just happened. 2 criminals hacked into Uber's systems, stole 57 million people's personal information, committed multiple federal crimes. And instead of getting arrested, they got paid. They got paid with non-disclosure agreements that made them Uber's partners in crime. On November 20th, 2016, 6 days after the breach, Uber wired $100,000, $50,000 to each hacker. The hackers signed agreements calling themselves security researchers, claiming they'd found a vulnerability through legitimate testing, promising they'd deleted all data. Sullivan and Clark marked the case closed in Uber's bug bounty system, filed it as routine security research, paid from the bug bounty budget. Nobody outside that small circle knew. Not the 57 million victims, not the FTC, not state regulators, not Uber's board of directors, nobody. But here's what they couldn't hide. The evidence. Every email Sullivan sent, Every Slack message between executives, every payment record, every contract with the hackers, all of it created digital footprints. And footprints in the digital age never really disappear. Let's do the math on this cover-up. Normal breach notification costs $500,000 to $2 million legal compliance, $200,000 customer notification, $800,000 credit monitoring for victims, $5.10 per person, or $285 from $550 million over 2 years. FTC penalties for violation during existing investigation, $5 $20 million reputation damage, significant but manageable cover-up costs, $148 million settlement, plus criminal prosecution. Hacker payment, $100,000 FTC settlement, $148 million legal fees, defense, $10+ million executive prison time, priceless reputation damage, catastrophic saved, short-term $285,590 million in credit monitoring, lost long-term $158+ million plus. Criminal conviction plus destroyed careers. They didn't save money. They gambled that they'd never get caught. Bad bet. Now here's where it gets worse. Remember, the FTC was actively investigating Uber for privacy violations, had been since 2015, were scheduled to conclude their investigation soon. In January 2017, 2 months after the breach, the FTC asked Uber a direct question. Have there been any data breaches or security incidents we should know about? Uber's lawyers, including Craig Clark, had a choice. Tell the truth? Yes, actually, hackers stole 57 million records 2 months ago. We paid them to stay quiet. We haven't told anyone. Or lie. They lied. Submitted documents to the FTC stating Uber had robust security, no significant breaches, no incidents requiring disclosure. This wasn't just covering up a breach anymore. This was lying to federal investigators during an active investigation. This transformed the case from civil violation to criminal obstruction. But at the time, Sullivan and Clark believed they'd succeeded. The hackers had signed agreements, deleted the data, or so they claimed. The FTC investigation continued without incident. Uber moved forward with business as usual. Throughout 2017, millions of people used Uber, rode in cars, shared their locations, trusted the app with their information. 600,000 drivers worked for Uber, many of them older Americans, supplementing fixed incomes. Their driver's licenses, their identities, had been stolen. They had no idea. If you or anyone you know drove for Uber between 2013 and 2016, their license was in that breach, and they weren't told for a year. Think about that. A year of vulnerability. A year when identity thieves could have used that information. A year of risk Uber hid from them. The company justified the silence internally. Executives convinced themselves they'd handled it, made a business decision, protected the company. Travis Kalanick knew. He'd been briefed, given the options, approved the payment. The board of directors, they weren't told until much later. Investors preparing for the IPO, they didn't know they were investing in a company hiding a massive breach. Customers booking rides, clueless, drivers earning income, unaware their licenses were compromised. All through 2017, Uber operated normally, expanded to new cities, grew revenue, prepared for going public. And the whole time, a digital time bomb was ticking. Because here's what Sullivan and Clark didn't understand. In the digital age, secrets don't stay secret. Too many people knew. The hackers, security team members who investigated, lawyers who reviewed contracts, finance people who processed payments, IT staff who saw the access logs. Every one of them was a potential leak. And in November 2017, exactly 1 year after the breach, someone talked. Before we get to how Uber's cover-up collapsed, you need to understand why this breach mattered so much. It's not just about Uber, it's about a pattern that affects everyone with a smartphone. Let me show you how modern data breaches work and why companies keep hiding them. Here's the system. The machine that turns your personal information into profit. It makes breaches so dangerous. When you download Uber's app and create an account, you provide full legal name, phone number, email address, credit card information, home address, pickup and drop-off locations, work address, regular destinations, travel patterns, where you go when you go. For drivers, even more. Driver's license, front and back photos, social security number, bank account for payments, vehicle registration, insurance information, background check data. All of this lives on servers, Amazon Web Services. In Uber's case, massive data centers storing billions of records. Now here's what makes this valuable to criminals. Your name and email, worth about $1 on the dark web. Your name, email, and phone number, $5. Your name, email, phone, and address, $10. Driver's license information, $50 to $100. Complete identity package. Everything needed to open credit cards, take out loans, commit financial fraud, $500 to $2,000 per identity. Multiply that by 57 million records. Do the math. Conservative estimate of breach value, 57 million user records at $5 each, $285 million and 600,000 driver licenses at $75 average, $45 million total black market value, $330 million Uber's payment to hackers, $100,000 ROI for hackers if they'd sold the data instead of accepting payment, 300 times their payout. That's why Uber was desperate to hide it. Not just reputation damage, the potential liability. If identity theft occurred using that stolen data, Uber could be sued by every victim, class action lawsuits in the billions. If drivers lost income because stolen licenses were used fraudulently, more lawsuits. If credit cards were compromised and used, banks could sue Uber for negligence. The exposure was enormous, so Uber's calculation was simple. Pay $100,000 now, avoid hundreds of millions later. But here's what they didn't calculate: the criminal exposure. Joe Sullivan wasn't just Uber's chief security officer. He was a former federal prosecutor, worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecuted cybercriminals, knew exactly what the law required. He knew that paying hackers without reporting to authorities was illegal. He knew that lying to the FTC during an investigation was obstruction of justice. He knew that hiding a breach affecting 57 million people violated multiple federal and state laws. He knew all of this and did it anyway. Why? Here's where understanding corporate pressure matters. If you worked in corporate America in the 1980s, 1990s, you remember a different culture. Companies valued stability, long-term thinking, reputation built over decades. Tech companies in 2016, different world. Move fast, break things, disrupt industries. Worry about consequences later. Travis Kalanick embodied this. Uber's culture reflected his personality. Aggressive, rule-breaking, win at all costs. Employees who raised concerns, often fired or sidelined. Lawyers who said, "We can't do that," replaced with lawyers who said, "Here's how we can." Sullivan faced immense pressure. Report the breach, and Kalanick might fire him. The IPO might collapse. His stock options, worth millions, might become worthless. Stay quiet, and maybe, just maybe, nobody ever finds out. He chose his financial future over 57 million people's security. That choice would haunt him. Throughout 2017, Sullivan maintained the cover-up, kept the breach out of security reports, avoided mentioning it in meetings. When asked about security posture, emphasized improvements without mentioning the massive failure. Craig Clark did the same. Filed FTC responses that omitted the breach, prepared board presentations that glossed over security incidents. The hackers kept quiet too. $50,000 each was good money for a few days' work. They'd signed agreements. No reason to talk. Uber's security team knew but stayed silent. Corporate pressure, fear of retaliation, belief that management knew best. The machine worked perfectly. Until June 2017. That's when Travis Kalanick stepped down as CEO. Not because of the data breach, that was still secret, because of everything else. Allegations of sexual harassment, toxic workplace culture, stealing trade secrets from competitors, fighting with regulators worldwide. Uber's board finally had enough, forced Kalanick out, brought in a new CEO. His name, Dara Khosrowshahi, former CEO of Expedia, known for steady leadership, brought in to clean up Uber's mess. And that's when the machine started breaking down, August 2017. Dara Khosrowshahi's first month as Uber's new CEO. He inherited a company in crisis, sexual harassment lawsuits, Department of Justice investigations, battles with regulators in dozens of cities, a board of directors at war with each other, and he had no idea about the data breach. Khosrowshahi came from Expedia, a traditional tech company, one that followed rules, disclosed problems, operated transparently. He started conducting what he called a culture audit, meeting with employees at all levels, asking, what's broken? What aren't we talking about? That's when people started talking. In September 2017, someone from the security team approached senior leadership. Not directly to Khosrowshahi, they were still too scared, but to his newly appointed legal team. The message was simple. There's something you need to know about last November. Khosrowshahi's reaction when he found out? Shock, then anger, then fear. Because he realized immediately what Sullivan and Clark had missed. The cover-up was worse than the breach. Data breaches happen. Target got hacked, Home Depot got hacked, Equifax got hacked. Companies survive if they handle it honestly, but covering up a breach while lying to federal investigators during an active FTC investigation, that's criminal. Khosrowshahi had a choice. He could continue the cover-up, keep it quiet, hope nobody outside Uber ever found out, or he could come clean, report it voluntarily, face the consequences, try to rebuild trust. Remember, Uber was still preparing for an IPO. Going public would make early investors billions, make Uber one of the most valuable public companies in America. Revealing a year-old data breach cover-up would destroy that timeline, tank the valuation, trigger lawsuits. But Khosrowshahi had seen what happened to companies that tried to hide scandals. Enron hid accounting fraud. Executives went to prison. WorldCom hid financial problems. CEO got 25 years. Theranos hid technology failures. Founder facing federal charges. The pattern was clear. Cover-ups always collapse. The only question is when. Khosrow Shahi made his choice. On November 21st, 2017, exactly 1 year and 1 week after the breach, Uber published a blog post. The headline, 2016 Data Security Incident. The post explained everything: the breach, the stolen data, the payment to hackers, the failure to notify victims. Khosrow Shahi's words, "None of this should have happened, and I will not make excuses for it." 57 million people learned their data was stolen. A year after it happened, 600,000 drivers discovered their licenses were compromised, a year too late to protect themselves. If you used Uber between 2013 and 2016, or know anyone who did, November 21st, 2017 was probably when you got that email. Important information about your Uber account. The reaction was immediate and brutal. State attorneys general launched investigations, all 50 states. The Federal Trade Commission, already investigating Uber for privacy violations, added the breach to their inquiry. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation, class action lawsuits filed within hours. And Joe Sullivan? He was fired the same day Uber made the announcement. Craig Clark resigned shortly after. The cover-up had collapsed. But here's what many people missed in the news coverage. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. This was a test case for accountability in the tech industry. For years, tech companies operated under different rules. Data breaches happened constantly. Companies paid small fines. Executives faced no personal consequences. The message to Silicon Valley was clear. Break fast, hide problems, pay fines from corporate treasury, move on. Nobody went to prison for data breaches. Nobody faced criminal charges. Worst case, you lost your job, but kept your stock options and found another CEO position 6 months later. Joe Sullivan was about to change that pattern, because the Department of Justice didn't just want to fine Uber. They wanted to send a message to every chief security officer, every general counsel, every executive who might face a similar choice. Hide a breach, lie to investigators, cover up crimes. You personally go to prison, not the company. You. In August 2020, nearly 3 years after the breach became public, federal prosecutors in San Francisco charged Joe Sullivan with 2 crimes. 1, obstruction of justice for hiding the breach from the FTC. 2, misprision of a felony for failing to report the hacking to authorities. Maximum sentence, 8 years in federal prison. Sullivan hired top lawyers, mounted an aggressive defense, argued he was following company orders, that he believed the bug bounty program was legitimate, but prosecutors had the evidence, the emails, the Slack messages, the payment records. Most damaging, Sullivan's own expertise. He'd spent years prosecuting cyber criminals. He knew exactly what the law required. He couldn't claim ignorance. The trial began in September 2022. Meanwhile, Uber itself faced consequences. In September 2018, attorneys general from all 50 states announced a settlement. Uber would pay $148 million, largest multi-state data breach settlement in history at that time. The Federal Trade Commission added their own penalties, required 20 years of independent privacy audits, mandated comprehensive security programs. If you have investments in technology stocks, pension funds with tech holdings, this settlement set a precedent. Data breach cover-ups now cost hundreds of millions. Not thousands, not millions, hundreds of millions. Pattern was changing. October 5th, 2022, 11:47 a.m. San Francisco Federal Courthouse. Jury foreman stands, reads the verdict. Count 1, obstruction of justice, guilty. Count 2, misprision of a felony, guilty. Joe Sullivan becomes the first executive in American history convicted of crimes for covering up a data breach. Maximum sentence, 8 years in federal prison. Think about what just happened. A chief security officer, following company culture, doing what his CEO wanted, making a business decision to hide a problem. Now facing prison. The message to Silicon Valley was unmistakable. You personally are responsible, not just the company, you. Can't hide behind corporate structure, can't claim you were following orders, can't say the lawyers approved it. If you know a breach happened and hide it, you go to prison. Let's count the final damage. Uber's total cost. Hacker payment, $100,000 wasted. FTC settlement and penalties, $148 million state settlements. $148 million. Same settlement covered both. Legal fees, defense, $15+ million estimated class action settlements, $100+ million estimated reputation damage. Incalculable. Executive lost. Sullivan convicted and imprisoned. Total $263+ million plus reputation destruction. What honest disclosure would have cost in November 2016. Immediate notification, $200,000 credit monitoring for $57 million, 2 years. $570 million FTC penalties during existing investigation, $10 million estimated reputation damage. Significant but manageable total, $780 million. Wait, that's more, not less. So why do I say the cover-up was worse? Because the credit monitoring cost? That's the right thing to do. Protecting victims, taking responsibility. The settlement cost? That's punishment for lying, for obstruction, for putting corporate profits over 57 million people's security. Plus, the criminal conviction. Joe Sullivan's career destroyed, prison time, forever marked as a felon. Plus, the message to every customer, every driver, every investor, Uber chose cover-up over honesty. Trust destroyed lasts longer than any financial penalty. Now here's the human cost nobody counted. 57 million people had their data stolen. 600,000 had their driver's licenses compromised. How many became identity theft victims? Uber never said. Probably doesn't know. But we can estimate. Industry average. 2 to 5% of breach victims experience identity theft within 2 years. 2% of 57 million. 1.14 million people. 5%? 2.85 million people. Somewhere between 1 and 3 million Americans likely suffered identity theft connected to this breach. Opening credit cards in their names. Taking out loans, filing false tax returns, draining bank accounts, and they found out a year too late to protect themselves. Real people, real damage. Meet Maria Rodriguez. Not a real name. Settlement agreements, sealed victim identities. Maria drove for Uber in Chicago, 58 years old, supplementing Social Security, drove evenings and weekends for extra income. In November 2016, her driver's license was in that breach. In March 2017, 4 months later, someone opened 3 credit cards in her name. Different states, $10,000 charged before she knew. She only discovered it when applying for a car loan. Credit score had dropped 200 points. Took her 2 years to clean up. 2 years of fighting credit bureaus, proving she wasn't the thief, closing fraudulent accounts. Uber never told her the breach might be connected, never offered help, never acknowledged responsibility. When Uber finally disclosed the breach in November 2017, Maria was still fighting the identity theft. She couldn't prove the theft came from Uber's breach, but the timing matched perfectly. If Uber had disclosed in November 2016, 72 hours after the breach, Maria would have frozen her credit, monitored her accounts, maybe prevented the fraud entirely. That year of silence cost her thousands in legal fees, damaged her credit, created stress and anxiety. She was one of possibly millions with similar stories. That's the real cost, not the settlement money, the human damage. In December 2016, 1 month after the breach, federal agents raided the hackers' homes. Not because of Uber. Different investigation, different crimes. Brandon Charles Glover, the Florida hacker, living with his parents, 20 years old, playing video games in his bedroom. Agents found evidence of multiple hacks on his computer, including Uber. If Sullivan had reported the breach when it happened, the FBI would have arrested Glover in November 2016, before he could hack anyone else, before he could sell or use Uber's data. Instead, he was arrested 2 months later for different crimes, and Uber's breach stayed secret for another year. Glover eventually pleaded guilty, got 3 years probation. Why so light? He cooperated, testified about other crimes, including Uber's payment. The Turkish hacker, Vasile Meriker, arrested in Germany in 2020, extradited to the United States, also cooperated. Both testified at Sullivan's trial. The people Uber paid to stay quiet became the prosecution's star witnesses. Think about that irony. Uber paid $100,000 for their silence, and they talked anyway. May 2023, federal courthouse in San Francisco. Sentencing day. Joe Sullivan stood before the judge, former federal prosecutor, former chief security officer of America's most valuable startup, now a convicted felon. His lawyers argued for probation, no prison time. He'd suffered enough, lost his career, his reputation, his stock options worth millions. Prosecutors wanted prison, 3 years. Send a message to Silicon Valley. The judge split the difference, 3 years probation, 360 hours community service. No prison time. Why no prison? The judge acknowledged Sullivan made terrible choices, but he wasn't motivated by personal greed. He followed company culture. Made decisions he believed protected Uber. Still guilty, still convicted, still a felon. But the judge showed mercy. Sullivan's career in tech finished. Who hires a chief security officer convicted of hiding a breach? His legal fees? Millions. Fighting a federal prosecution isn't cheap. His reputation destroyed. Google his name. First result? Convicted of covering up Uber data breach. That follows him forever. Craig Clark, Uber's senior lawyer who helped orchestrate the cover-up. He avoided criminal charges. Why? He cooperated with investigators, provided evidence against Sullivan, testified about internal discussions. Remember that lesson. In white-collar cases, first to talk often avoids prison. Clark lost his job at Uber, but wasn't criminally charged. Travis Kalanick, the CEO who approved the cover-up, never charged. Why not? Harder to prove. Kalanick didn't handle details, made broad decisions, let subordinates execute. Prosecutors couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Kalanick knew the specific legal violations occurring. Pattern familiar? Top executives rarely face consequences. Mid-level executives like Sullivan take the fall. But Kalanick paid too. Forced out as CEO, his reputation permanently damaged. Tried starting new companies, all struggled. The board of directors? No consequences. The investors? They lost money when Uber's valuation dropped after the breach disclosure. But here's who really paid. The victims. Uber's $148 million settlement didn't go to victims. Went to state treasuries, funded government programs, helped state budgets. Victims got offers for free credit monitoring. 2 years, worth maybe $10 per person. If you were one of the 57 million victims, you got $10 worth of credit monitoring after your data was stolen. That's it. Class action lawsuits eventually settled for more. Uber paid additional money, but most victims received tiny checks, $20 to $50, after lawyers took their third. Compared to the damage, potentially millions in identity theft losses across all victims. The math doesn't work. Now here's what happened to Uber the company. Dara Khosrowshahi spent years rebuilding trust, implemented strict security protocols, hired independent auditors, created transparency reports. In May 2019, Uber finally went public. IPO price, $45 per share. Valued the company at $82 billion. Not the $120 billion Kalanick hoped for, but still massive. If you invested in Uber's IPO, many retirement funds and pension plans did, the data breach disclosure affected your returns. Share price dropped below IPO price within months. Took years to recover. That affected retirement accounts, pension funds, college savings plans. As of 2025, Uber operates in 10,000 cities, still dominant in ride sharing. But the breach changed how all tech companies handle security. Before Uber's conviction, data breach disclosure was inconsistent. Companies decided when or if to report. After, new laws passed. California's data breach notification law strengthened, must notify within specified timeframes. European Union's GDPR imposed massive penalties for breach cover-ups. Other states followed. By 2025, all 50 states have strict notification requirements. And corporate executives know, hide a breach, risk prison. That's Sullivan's legacy, not the cover-up. The conviction that changed industry behavior. If you use apps, store data online, trust companies with information, you benefit from that change. Because companies now fear criminal prosecution more than reputation damage. That fear protects you. So what does Uber's $148 million cover-up teach? Not just about ride-sharing apps, about data, privacy, corporate responsibility, and the systems that should protect ordinary people's personal information. 3 lessons matter. Lesson 1, your data is valuable and vulnerable. Every app you download, every account you create, every service you use. They collect data, store it, make money from it, and that data can be stolen. Think about apps on your phone right now. Banking apps with account numbers, shopping apps with credit cards, social media with personal details, email with everything. Each one stores your information on servers someone can hack. Uber had top security experts, billions in funding, still got hacked. If you have any of these, and who doesn't, your data has probably been in at least one breach. Email account, social media profile, banking or credit card shopping accounts, medical records online, government services accessed digitally. Average American has been in 4 to 6 data breaches. Many don't know it. What to watch? Red flag, number 1, companies delaying security announcements. If the company you use suddenly changes terms of service, updates privacy policy, or sends vague, "we're improving security" emails without explaining why, they might have been breached. Red flag number 2, unexpected account activity, strange login attempts, password reset emails you didn't request, emails about account changes you didn't make. These often appear before companies disclose breaches. Red flag number 3, companies fighting transparency requirements. When companies lobby against data breach notification laws, ask why. What do they want to hide? What to do? If you have accounts with any major company, and that's everyone, enable 2-factor authentication everywhere possible. Use different passwords for different accounts. Password managers help. Monitor credit reports. Free at annualcreditreport.com. Consider credit freezes. Prevents fraudulent accounts being opened. Check bank statements weekly, not monthly boring. Yes. Necessary? Absolutely. Because companies won't always protect you. Sometimes they'll hide breaches for a year. Protect yourself. Lesson 2. Corporate culture drives behavior more than rules. Uber had data breach policies, security protocols, legal requirements. But the culture said, move fast, hide problems, protect the IPO. Culture 1. This pattern repeats across industries. Enron. Culture of aggressive accounting. Executives ignored rules, hid losses. Collapse 2001, $74 billion lost. Wells Fargo, culture of impossible sales targets. Employees opened fake accounts to meet quotas. Scandal exposed 2016, millions of fraudulent accounts. Boeing, 737 MAX, culture of speed over safety, rushed certification, 2 crashes, 346 dead. Theranos, culture of fake it until you make it. Fraudulent blood tests, endangered patient lives. Volkswagen, culture of beating emissions rules at any cost. Installed defeat devices, massive fraud. FTX, culture of risk-taking without limits. Used customer money for gambling. $32 billion lost. Same pattern. Toxic culture. Employees who know better but follow anyway. Eventual collapse. Uber wasn't unique. Culture of rule-breaking led inevitably to covering up a breach. Here's what this means if you have investments in stocks, mutual funds, retirement accounts. Watch for culture red flags. Executive turnover. People leaving rapidly suggest problems. Regulatory investigations, where smoke, usually fire. Whistleblower complaints, they're usually right. Aggressive growth without profit, unsustainable. Company culture shows up in financial results eventually. Lesson 3. Mid-level executives pay for crimes leaders order. Joe Sullivan, convicted, felony record, career destroyed. Craig Clark, cooperated, avoided charges, career damage, but salvageable. Travis Kalanick, never charged, started new companies, still wealthy. Uber board, no consequences. Pattern you've seen before. Enron, mid-level executives and accountants went to prison. Top leadership mostly avoided jail or got lighter sentences. 2008, financial crisis. Thousands of loan officers and mid-level bankers lost jobs. Top bank CEOs, most kept their positions, received bonuses. Theranos, lab directors faced consequences. Elizabeth Holmes, convicted but founder, received lighter treatment than employees. The system's fundamental flaw. People making decisions rarely face worst consequences. Sullivan made terrible choices, deserved punishment. But Kalanick ordered the cover-up. Kalanick created the culture that made it possible, and Kalanick faced no criminal charges. Until that changes, until top executives fear prison personally, expect more scandals, because the incentives haven't changed. What's coming next? This pattern isn't finished. Right now, 2025, dozens of companies have undisclosed breaches, industry estimates. Average time to discover a breach, 207 days. Average time between discovery and disclosure, 60 to 90 days. If pattern holds, and it always does, we'll see another major breach cover-up exposed by late 2025 or 2026. Watch for tech companies suddenly changing chief security officers, stage 3 warning. Often happens months before breach disclosures. New CSO comes in, discovers hidden problems, forces disclosure. Unusual security updates or password reset requirements, stage 4 evidence. Companies sometimes force password resets after breaches, but before public disclosure. Regulatory investigations announced without clear cause, stage 4 critical. When FTC or state attorneys general suddenly investigate a company's data practices without explaining why, often means they've discovered an undisclosed breach. Historical precedent? Uber. Warnings appeared when new CEO arrived, disclosed 3 months later. Equifax. Breach occurred May 2017, disclosed September 2017, gap 4 months. Yahoo. Breach occurred 2013, disclosed 2016, gap 3 years. Current situation. Multiple tech companies under privacy investigation right now. Some have likely experienced breaches not yet disclosed. Do the math. I'm watching 2 things. First, European data protection authorities. They've been more aggressive than US regulators. Often break news first. Second, class action law firms. They often know about breaches before public disclosure. Watch their website announcements, because it will happen again. Here's uncomfortable truth about data privacy in 2025. The system that enabled Uber's cover-up hasn't fundamentally changed. Companies still collect massive amounts of personal data, still stored on servers that can be hacked, still have financial incentives to hide problems. What changed? Criminal liability for executives who cover up. That's progress. But until we address the root cause, companies collecting and storing unnecessary data in the first place, breaches will continue. Every app doesn't need your location data. Every website doesn't need your email. Every company doesn't need to track your behavior. But they do it anyway, because data equals money, your information, their profit. And when hackers steal it, you suffer the consequences. That fundamental equation hasn't changed. Let me show you how this pattern repeats across different companies, different industries, same mistakes. 4 major corporate data breach cover-ups. Target, 2013. First warnings. Security team detected breach during November 2013. Holiday shopping. Immediate response. Security alerts ignored by management for days. Disclosure, December 19th, 2013, after media inquiries. Gap, less than 1 month, but only disclosed after caught regulators. State attorneys general investigated immediately. Outcome, 40 million credit cards compromised, CEO fired, $290 million settlement. What victims got? Free credit monitoring, $10,000 maximum per person. If proven, identity theft. Yahoo, 2013. First warnings. Breach occurred August 2013. Internal knowledge. Security team knew within weeks. Disclosure. September 2016, 3 years later. Gap, 3 years of silence. Regulators. SEC investigated delay outcome. 3 billion accounts affected, destroyed. Verizon acquisition value, $350 million reduction. CEO lost bonus. What victims got? Credit monitoring, minimal direct compensation. Equifax, 2017. First warnings. Breach discovered July 29th, 2017. Executive response. Top executives sold stock. August 1 to 2, 2017, before public knew. Disclosure. September 7th, 2017. Gap, 6 weeks, during which executives profited from insider knowledge. Regulators, FTC, state attorneys general, congressional investigation. Outcome. 147 million Americans affected, $700 million settlement. CEO resigned. What victims got? Credit monitoring up to $20,000 of proven damage, but complex claims. Process Uber 2016. First warnings. Breach discovered November 14th, 2016. Executive response. Paid hackers, $100,000 covered up disclosure. November 21st, 2017. Not exactly 1 year later. Gap. 1 year of deliberate cover-up with false FTC filings. Regulators, FTC, all 50 state attorneys general, DOJ criminal prosecution. Outcome, 57 million affected, $148 million settlement, CSO criminally convicted. What victims got? Credit monitoring, minimal compensation, victims not prioritized. Notice the pattern? Discovery to disclosure gaps. Target, less than 1 month, but only after caught. Yahoo, 3 years Equifax, 6 weeks, executives sold stock first. Uber, 1 year, deliberate cover-up, regulatory response speed. Target, immediate state investigations. Yahoo, slow SEC inquiry. Equifax, fast congressional hearings, major FTC action. Uber, criminal charges against executive accountability. Target, CEO fired, no criminal charges. Yahoo, CEO lost bonus, no criminal charges. Equifax, CEO resigned with $90 million package, no criminal charges. Uber, CSO criminally convicted, first time ever. Victim compensation. Target, $10,000 max if proven damage. Yahoo, minimal, mostly credit monitoring. Equifax, up to $20,000 but complex process. Most got $125. Uber, credit monitoring, $20, $50 average in class action. What happened to the data? Target, credit cards used for fraud within days. Yahoo, unknown, breach. So old data likely already sold. Equifax, identity theft, spike in following years. Uber, unknown, hackers claimed they deleted it, doubtful. Current company status. Target, still operating, recovered reputation. Yahoo, sold to Verizon at reduced price, brand diminished. Equifax, still operating, stock recovered, required security improvements. Uber, still dominant in ride sharing, new leadership, improved security. See the evolution. Each breach led to stronger consequences. Target, fired CEO, financial penalty. Yahoo, damaged acquisition, executive compensation clawed back. Equifax, massive settlement, congressional attention. Uber, criminal conviction, changed industry standards. Pattern shows enforcement getting stronger, but still reactive, not preventive. Companies still wait to be caught, still calculate whether hiding is worth the risk. Until the calculation changes, until hiding a breach guarantees criminal prosecution, not just possibly, pattern continues. Timeline comparison. When did they know versus when did public know? Target knew November, disclosed December, DAR for month gap. Yahoo knew 2013, disclosed 2016, remember 3-year gap. Equifax knew July, disclosed September. Jitter 2-month gap. Uber knew November 2016, disclosed November 2017. Rumor's 12-month gap. Average gap, 12.25 months. That's how long companies hide breaches when they think they can get away with it. That's how long your data is vulnerable before you know to protect yourself. That's the cost of cover-up culture. November 14th, 2016, 11:47 p.m., San Francisco. Joe Sullivan stares at his laptop screen. 57 million records, stolen, right there in front of him. He has 72 hours to do the right thing, report to authorities, notify victims, follow the law he spent his career enforcing. Instead, He types an email to the hackers, starts negotiating payment, begins a cover-up that will cost $148 million, destroy his career, and make him the first executive in American history convicted of crimes for hiding a data breach. One decision, one moment, changed everything. The question I asked at the beginning, how did $100,000 turn into $148 million in penalties? Here's the answer. Cover-ups always cost more than honesty. Not just money, trust, reputation, careers, freedom. Sullivan thought he was protecting Uber, protecting the IPO, protecting his stock options worth millions. Instead, he protected nothing. The breach came out anyway. The truth always does. But 57 million people lost a year of protection they should have had. A year when they could have frozen credit, monitored accounts, protected themselves. That year of silence, that was the real crime, not the breach, the cover-up. But here's what nobody talks about. The system that created Sullivan's choice still exists. Tech companies still collect enormous amounts of personal data, still store it on servers that can be hacked, still have financial incentives to hide problems. What changed after Uber? Executives know hiding a breach can mean prison. That's progress, but it's not enough. Until we fundamentally rethink data collection, until companies stop collecting information they don't need, storing data longer than necessary, sharing details without clear consent, breaches will continue. And some companies will still try to hide them. Different name, different service, same pattern. What to watch? I'll be tracking 3 indicators that predict the next major breach disclosure. European Data Protection Authority investigations. Watch GDPR enforcement news. EU regulators often find breaches before US authorities. Sudden changes in company privacy policies. When companies update policies without clear reason, often they're preparing for disclosure. Class action law firm announcements. They often investigate breaches before public disclosure. Watch their press releases. If I see all 3 happening to the same company within a month, that signals imminent disclosure. History says we're due for another major tech company breach disclosure by late 2025. Average time between major disclosures, 24 months. Uber was November 2017. Equifax, September 2017. Capital One, July 2019. Marriott, November 2018. Gap narrows each time as more breaches occur. We're approaching critical mass because it will happen again. Maybe not ride sharing next time. Maybe social media, maybe healthcare, maybe financial services. But somewhere, right now, a chief security officer is staring at evidence of a breach and making the same choice Sullivan faced: report or hide. Because of Sullivan's conviction, more will choose report, but some won't. And we'll be back here in 18 months, analyzing another cover-up, counting another settlement, adding to the list of millions whose data was stolen and hidden. Until that fundamental calculation changes, until the cost of collecting and storing unnecessary data exceeds the profit, the cycle continues. Joe Sullivan sits in his home today, 3 years probation completed, community service finished, conviction permanent. Google his name, first result, criminal conviction for covering up a data breach. That's his legacy. Not the career prosecuting cyber criminals, not the work protecting companies. The cover-up, one decision, one moment, one email to hackers instead of to the FBI, changed everything. Remember that next time you're asked to download an app, create an account, share personal information, ask, does this company really need this data? Will they protect it? And if they can't, will they tell me? Because history says, probably not.